Hello and welcome. I'm RiverSoft Art, and I'm here today to talk about my upcoming product, Render Doctor. Render Doctor is a script for DAZ Studio that automates the rendering of long sequences of images. Render a list of scenes, a list of presets, cameras, nodes, and more. So one of the first things you can do with Render Doctor is you can render a series of presets. So you can load in your scene, select this woman, for example, or select her skirt, and add a bunch of presets to change the material for the skirt. And so Render Doctor would then load or apply the material, render images, apply the next material or preset, render images, etc., etc., etc. What makes it so powerful is you can actually change selections during your render sequence. So you could select the skirt, apply a preset, don't render, select the hair, apply a different preset, don't render, select the figure and apply a shape preset, and then finally render. And in this sequence, you can see that the skirt, the boots, the top, the hair, and the background were all selected and changed, and then did 6 renders. And in this last one, it's even changed the material and the shape on the figure. You can also render a series of scenes. So you could add a list of scenes and then render them one by one. You can also have it, once it's loaded a scene, select different areas in the scene, frame them using the cameras, and then render that. So you can get multiple views in the same scene and have these all rendered up as one long operation. You could render all the cameras in the scene, or a subset of cameras. You can also render all the nodes or skeletons or selected nodes or skeletons in the scene. So this is a great way to kind of document the entire scene. Have Render Doctor automatically go through and select skeletons in the scene and then render them. Now, what makes Render Doctor even more powerful is that all of those options I just talked about, for every image, if you will actually generate potentially dozens of images. You can render any DAZ draw style or iRay or 3 to light, and you can render all of them for each of the images. So it isn't you just choose one. You can choose, I want to render iRay and hidden line and wireframe. You can also render at multiple resolutions. So it comes with a long list of resolutions added for you, but you can add any you want. And all of these can be rendered for every image in the sequence. You can do something from photography, exposure and aperture bracketing. These are not available for all of the draw styles. Exposure bracketing is for an iRay only feature, and aperture bracketing is iRay or 3 to light only. So on the left, we are rendering this camera view, and we are doing aperture bracketing, which changes the depth of field. On the right, we are doing exposure level bracketing, and it's changing the lighting, under and overexposing the lighting. So let's get started. So in here, I have a scene, the Shinto temple. I've added some cameras. I've added a couple of figures, and let's see how Render Doctor works. So you have your scene. You just double click it and you bring it up. Now, at the top, you have some instructions, and then you have a list of favorites. So you can save and restore settings that you like. And these favorites don't actually overwrite a list of presets you may have or a list of scenes that you may have, but all other settings are loaded. On the left, you have the render tab and then just various option tabs. So going through the options first, you have your output option. The first thing you need to set is the output directory where you want your renders to go. You can optionally specify a background color or image. Importantly, you have a file naming strategy. How do you want to name the files so they don't, collide and that you get every file you want? You can, for some of them, you could select by item name. So if you have in here, if you were doing all the nodes, you could do all item name or their labels, or you can do a custom one where it's a combination of you add in placeholders, a %N for a sequence number, %C for the camera's label, E for exposure level, W for width, H for height, etc., etc. You can also specify the image format, whether you want PNG, JPEGs, TIFFs, or BMPs. Now there's also render options, and here's where you specify all of the render styles you want. You, of course, can check iRay, 3-to-Light, or any of them. Some of them won't combine too well. Combining iRay and 3-to-Light usually won't work because the materials are so different. And for this demo, I'm not going to do either of those because they are very slow. And but you could use any of the others. So I will do texture shaded and hidden line. And then you have a checklist box of resolutions. And you have square, widescreen, icon size. You can also take the scene resolution. So take what's in this scene and pull it out. And in fact, I'll do that. But you could select multiple ones, and they have a naming strategy you can do for these. So you can say, okay, well, to make sure, so let's say if I checked a bunch of these, they would, just using the output file name, if this was not specified so it had the width and height, they could actually collide with each other and overwrite each other when they're rendering. So you can also state, oh, well, what I would like to do is prepend the width and height resolution, or prepend a label, and I could type it in here. Prepend the camera, or append these different things, or actually use different subdirectories. So each resolution would be in its own subdirectory. But you can decide based upon each resolution. So for like this one, I've had it so it'll append tip so that it gives me a tip icon. I'm going to uncheck these, but it's easy to do any of them. So if we were doing iRay or 3-to-Light, we could have exposure and f-stop or aperture bracketing. The final option here is simulate renders. So if this is checked, it allows you to, or it will make Render Doctor do all of the actions that it would do for, the sequence operation you want to do, except for the actual rendering. So you can see, okay, that is what I want. I wanted it to apply that preset to that and do that, and then pause and do a render. And this actually gives you a little pause between them. So that can be very useful. So other options. So you have iRay specific options, and if you check this, it overrides the iRay options within the scene. So you could say for the sequence, I want them to only 60 seconds, no longer. Or you could take whatever's in the scene and, take whatever stopping conditions it has, headlamp or whatever. And you have some other properties for 3-to-Light. And finally, there's a log. Now the render tab is the important one. This is where you actually have the different render sequence options. You can do render camera, which is rendering all the cameras I mentioned this earlier, rendering all the cameras in the scene, render presets, render scenes, and render nodes. And I'm going to go through all of these. Finally, at the bottom, there's a render current scene. So this takes your current camera and scene and goes through all of these render options. So we could set it up. So we're doing these three, and the scene resolution and a square one, and just render current scene, and it will run through it. I'm going to move this to the side. All right, and now it put in my output directory these three different types and their resolutions. So that's texture shaded square, smooth shaded, and hidden line. I'm going to delete these so we can see every time I do an action. So that button's kind of like a quick, let me just see what's in this scene. And finally, you can load and save the entire preset. So I mentioned the favorites save the settings, but not the different files or lists. These will actually save the files as well. So render camera. So here's where it sets up, and it will populate this view with all the cameras it has in the scene, and you could select I want the current camera, or I want all the orthogonal cameras, back, front, left, right, etc. All cameras, all perspective cameras, all that match a label. So overhead, or the entrance. And finally, you can have custom. So I've selected here all perspective, but then I say, no, I don't want the perspective, default perspective camera, so it's custom. And this is actually a awesome tool for just going through your scene cameras. Very easy to just change them, see each one, what they're looking at. So, I'm going to reduce the number of draw styles and number of resolutions. Go back to render camera, and it has a button at the bottom. One last thing, you could set it up so it will frame whatever selected when you've started the application or started the script with each camera. But I like these different framing. I want to keep it exactly like this, so I will just render. And it goes through all the cameras and all of the render styles. So there's texture shaded for all the different cameras we selected, and then there's hidden wire. So that's render camera. There's also render presets. So this is where I'm applying a material preset or a pose or a shape preset or really any presets. You again can select the different cameras you want to do. Let's do the dragon camera. We'll select this one. And then we can add a series of presets. So I selected before starting the Chozuya, which is this dragon-like creature here. I can add Oh, I need to find them. So you can either add by file or directory, or you can also add, if you add a render doctor as a custom action, you could select in the files part of the smart content, or in the content tab, whichever's active, and then when you click this, it says, do you want to replace or add these new presets to the file list? So we'll add them, and it's in there. So then we can, now only makes sense to do texture shaded or iRay or 3 to light. So we'll do that. We'll set that back up. And you can also have a recovery action. Something I should mention is that after every apply preset render, do you want it to do anything? Or can you want it to try and undo everything since I applied that preset? Or actually even reload the scene if sometimes undo isn't powerful enough. You also, I mentioned, can supply a lot of actions. So if I wanted to change, the woman, I could add another preset and say, here, do not render after I've changed the dragon's material, and then have the other one and go forward from there. But we'll just do a simple one. As I mentioned, it won't necessarily render all of these because it will be applying, and some of them will say do not render. So if we click, and for this one, since it's just a material, I don't need it to undo, so just render. And you'll see that it's changing here as it applies the different materials. All right. If I go back in here and refresh, here's our different Chozuya dragon with the different colors. All right, so that's render presets. The render scenes is very similar. I'm not going to actually execute this because it can take a long time to load a scene, but you can have it go load a scene, do a post-load action where it can select something in the scene, and then do then finally render. So this is as easy to set up since you don't know the camera names beforehand. You don't have that list of cameras, but it's easy actually to say, okay, I want to do all the cameras, as I mentioned earlier, that are overhead. And this is a regular expression. If you know how that works, you can get very complicated in this. Finally, there's render nodes, and this one's, as I mentioned, kind of for going through a scene and rendering different nodes. So we could say, I want to do all skeletons, and let's change it from texture. I want to do hidden line renders of all of the skeletons in this scene here. And we can do them separately, which means do them each one by one, frame it in the camera, render, frame the next one in the camera, render, or take all the skeletons together and group them. See that? You can do it also by selection. So if I had selected a bunch of different ones over here, you could say do all the selected nodes separately. So we'll do this all skeletons separately. And it will go through all of the skeletons that are in the scene and apply our render style. And it's using the current, I believe I set it up for the current camera. There's a lot of them. So we're about 50%. There it's doing the eyebrows of the woman. Okay. And at the beginning when you hit render, the beginning of this operation I should have, it will actually tell you all of the skeletons it found here. And then it gives you a calculation of what it thinks the number of images it's going to generate based upon all your options. And I have it set up so it's naming using the custom naming convention. So this is Helena Hare. This is her the tabby. I think that's the shoe-like things. You can't see them. The obi, I believe that's the belt-like stuff. This is the kimono itself. And it's taking that camera, so sometimes you will have things in the way. This eyebrows, etc. But it's really easy to set up. I said I wasn't going to render, but just to show you, like the exposure and aperture, I've pre-rendered those. So how would I have set it up first? Okay, so if I wanted, I could select the render cameras. And I believe it's the Dragon camera is one of them. Oops, it's framed it, so that's a, let's undo that. So it will put you back where it was for all the cameras. So if we take the Dragon camera here, and I believe this one also has a depth of field. So I set it up so I only selected those two cameras and deselected the rest. And then I went under render options and I turned it on so I have two different f-stops and a f-stop bracketing. So this would take the camera's aperture. Let's save that so you can see it. So the Dragon camera, it has a focal distance of 90, and then it will plus or minus 40, so 50 and 130, and then do it again because we asked for 2, and so it would be 10, 50, 90, 130, 180. And we could also combine it with exposure bracketing. So, you know, let's bump the level by 1 and do 2 of those. And we would have 5 times 5, 25 for just rendering this one image. And then by your adding the different resolutions, you could make it 50. And by adding the different styles, you could make it a lot more. Very easy to set up, but very powerful for finding the look you want or the render you want, or just being able to do all these renders while you walk away and do something else. So I did that for this. Well, actually, this one I did, all the cameras in there in the scene, all the perspective cameras. So I took the render cameras, all the perspective cameras except for this one. I had aperture bracketing on, so it generated, these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cameras, and 2 of them had depth of field, giving you 10 for those. So here's all the images, and this is I rendered in iRay, and it was very easy to set up. So different cameras here, the depth of field is different, so you notice that the fence in the background is blurry, and up here is blurry. And as we change this, things are the depth, it gets wider, and we can see more. And the same for this one. And you can see the woman in the background getting slowly more sharper, and all the different images. So that is a quick whirlwind tour of Render Doctor. It's incredibly powerful. I'm excited to get it in your hands. I hope you will like it. And I will talk to you next time. Have a great day. Bye.